This is Tracy Drummond, and I am in Annapolis with Mr. Herbert Scurlock to continue our interview that we started yesterday. Today is Sunday, December 18th, 2022. Good afternoon, Mr. Scurlock.
Hello.
I wanted to ask before we get started, did you have anything from yesterday that you wanted to follow up on or say more about?
Yes,
Okay.
I think that I need to kind of give you an indication as to where I was as the science of electronics evolved to today's existence.
Okay.
Um, for example, when I was a technician, uh, I worked uh, in the during the installation of electronics at Dulles Airport. The procedure usually follows the following. The manufacturer sends a technical uh, representative and a team to install the equipment. Beyond that, then, the FAA has to accept the installation as being sufficient, accurate, and doing what it's supposed to do. And during that time, I worked as a technician during the time of FAA acceptance of the equipment. Uh, Also, I worked in the beginning, uh, in my beginning, in a situation where uh, the electronics were all fueled by vacuum tubes that could easily wear out and required a room, an air-conditioned room, full of equipment with vacuum tubes for computers and the like. Um, One of the things that we had to do before these things that we accept today, like the uh, uh, satellites, is that there was no satellites during the time when I entered into FAA. Um, we take GPS now as an accepted uh, device for navigation, whether on the ground or whether in the sky. Uh, and of course, none of those computer-related kinds of devices require a large room that's air conditioned to be able to operate properly. Um, we, of course, initially used to uh, control air traffic control using uh, devices that had signals that traveled at ground level from one place to the other. For example, I was hired to work in the control center. A control center is a place where controllers control traffic, not in the existing housing where they operated from, but for distances of 300 miles, 150 miles, having radars which were able to pick up aircraft in several jurisdictions where there are radar sites. For example, in the Washington area, we had a radar site in Suitland, Maryland, that covered a distance of about 150 miles. That signal, of course, could be picked up in Richmond, Virginia, where controllers are situated, meaning that you get coverage over the entire United States based upon the equipment we had at the same time. So what we used to have was relay stations in various farm real estate, because as broadcast signals travel, they begin to get weaker further they go. So we need relay stations to beef up those signals and convey them further. And we had those spaced such as is required to wind up on a display for the air traffic controllers in several hundred miles. Those were the days when one could become excited about that. Later on, of course, now with the application of television and being able to view things that are happening news-wise around the world, we were able later to be able to use television as a part of the control devices used in the control centers and in the control towers. We find that what used to require certain mechanical kinds of devices to drive the scopes, we currently are able, through television technology, to be able to just display a picture without complicated devices to view the scope. we are finding also that with the advent of television as a part of the components used to display, we are able to eliminate some part of that was manual required by the air traffic controllers to mark the identity of the aircraft they are controlling. For example, instead of marking with a grease pencil on a device as a indicated aircraft on the scope, we have been able now to mark and identify on the television display the identity of the aircraft that's being controlled without relying on the manual kinds of operation requiring that there be a person marking and tracking various and identifying various aircraft. The aircraft has a way and a device that identifies, provides certain, broadcasts certain information to the controllers that is advisory to use. I'm sure that controllers are conditioned such that if that identification has to, at least temporarily, go offline, they're still able and trained to operate and maintain aircraft separation. I thought I would add those parts of it which made the evolution of electronics to today that made it all very exciting.
It sounds like you have a genuine continuing interest in electronics work.
Oh, yes, I do. Of course, the evolution of transistors has just revolutioned everything. What used to be required in the computers at the beginning used to require an entire room that had to be air conditioned and the like, and also with punched IBM cards that were used to perform certain functions. And now it's been all reduced to the point of a handheld computer that's transistorized to perform the same functions.
A few of the times that I've come over, you have an Alexa to help you with simple tasks and to answer questions. How have you found Alexa? How have you found that kind of technology?
How am I handled?
Well, what do you think about that kind of technology?
The one, actually, I currently have a computerized device that is able to research any questions that I may have currently in terms of what's going on in the world and in electronics, and I rely upon it to give me dates in terms of being current. Um, I rely on it a lot. It's also my encyclopedia and newscasts and weathercasts as to what's going on in my immediate vicinity.
So it keeps you connected.
Oh, it does. At this point, all I can do is to hear the news on television, and I'm able to be inquisitive about questions that I may have based upon the current state of things reported.
Do you have anything else about this topic that you want to say? Because I've got a few follow-up questions too.
It doesn't come to mind, but may
Okay.
come to pass as you question me
Okay.
in the interview.
Okay. Great. So there's one specific, and I couldn't quite find the right words for it yesterday to ask, but on one of the earlier resumes that you sent to me, or that Cynthia sent, your wife, to share with me before I came over to talk to you the first time, it mentions that you did electronic work on the Honey Fitz, which was it was the presidential yacht for President Kennedy.
Yes, the preceding presidents did not take to the use of the presidential yacht and just lay in the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. When I worked on it, it was called the Barbara Ann, which was Presidential Eisenhower's yacht, and succeeded to be renamed for the Kennedy's administration.
And what kind of work did you do?
It was electronic communications equipment. The president, wherever he was, whether he was at Camp David or wherever, as an alternate White House in times of emergency or war, required that he be able to communicate to the world from a bunker or from a yacht or whatever, wherever. And so they upgraded the electronics on that yacht to enable him to get on all of the frequencies around the world so he could be heard in those situations in which he found himself. It required, of course, I believe it was something to the effect of, I understood was 2,800 frequencies around the world that he could access from his yacht using a telephone-like device.
How long did that work take?
Well, that work took about, let's say, probably about maybe as much as 4 or 5 months.
Okay. And how big was your team that worked on it?
The team I had was probably about 5 technicians.
Okay. And then the other follow-up question I had is that when I was here the first time, I made some notes, and I missed this yesterday, but you talked about a mentor that you had, Earl Huntington?
Yes.
Do you want to speak about Mr. Huntington a little?
Yes. Mr. Huntington was a manager, and as a manager, he was able to have the qualifications of working in positions throughout the government that required his expertise. I was assigned to him from New York to the D.C. area where he had an office, and his office was in Virginia, right across the bridge from D.C. And I entered there handling pretty much the program for benefits such as the retirement and the investments that employees could make, and all of that kind of informational kind of situations that new and retiring employees would need to have place. During that time, of course, I remember that he was a stern taskmaster, and part of my responsibility was to write, having written input on certain personnel or HR policies in my area. And the first thing that he converted me to do was, instead of trying to be eloquent in terms of what I wrote, but to write on a 6th grade level of understanding, just as we talk directly to each other in clarified speech or basic speech, we should communicate to the employees likewise, that they could understand. And so he was a real taskmaster. And as I went along, of course, he put me in situations for training, education that would prepare me to run the office. He and so he was the one that kind of steered my career right along, and that's how I was in situations where he had moved to other agencies of the government or departments of the government where I could follow him along as a part of his team, and how to meet. He put me in situations where I had to meet certain criteria and compete with others to qualify and ultimately be selected for commission for positions in organizations where he worked. He was very careful that what took place would not show favoritism, but put me in a position to compete fairly with the other qualifying people for the position.
Were you typically the only African American going up for these positions?
Well, he was the only African American in his position.
Okay.
and likewise.
Okay. So this takes us to about 1970. That's kind of where I remember leaving off yesterday. When you became chief of the personnel officer.
Yeah.
And of the EEO staff.
Yeah.
So there are two anecdotes about, or that I took notes about along with that position. And let me ask you first, I guess, to describe that work and how you got put into that position.
Okay. Well, we had the government, or Congress, I guess, a president passed a civil rights law in 64. And it addressed the unequal situations where lots of the government positions were occupied by white persons with an absentee of black persons in some of the key positions. A part of that law required that black folks compete for those positions, and that they become aware of how to of the existence of those availabilities, so that they could be considered for those positions. there was another component of that to ensure that that took place called affirmative action. That meant that minority persons uh, were assured to be considered for those positions and agencies that and contractors that did work for the federal government assured that took place. And so there was a mechanism that was put in place to assure that all took place. We found that the air traffic controllers in FAA were lacking a representative number of minority persons. And we implemented in FAA a network of minority recruiters who would seek out minority persons to compete and enter into the beginning positions or the entry positions for air traffic control.
Okay.
We found that there was a problem that the entry test that recruiters had to apply to the recruits that they had gathered passing the entry test dealing with spatial relationships and certain items, other items that were a part of air traffic control competency requirements. So we were faced with their efforts and not meeting with the success that we desired. So we had to create some bridge positions that would be an entry basis into the beginning entry into air traffic control. For example, we created a position called the GS 150 program, which was one that looked at positions that existed in government employment that seemed to reflect what kind of competency required as a background qualification to enter air traffic control. So we set up those bridge positions, and we found also to help with the test taking ability that uh, the recruits had to be comfortable taking a test and to answer certain questions. Uh, this was a costly undertaking, and the FAA could not afford that aspect of it. And we contacted Reverend Leon Sullivan in Philadelphia, who headed the OIC, which was nationwide Opportunities Industrialization Center. And he had a staff that equipped through training people to perform certain productive jobs that they could enter into the workforce with that talent that they'd acquired from training. And so he had Labor Department funding to that extent. And so his staff of instructors were able to meld with the FAA recruiters candidates and to bring them up to speed so that they could represent well their capability on the entry test qualification. I understood that the Reverend Sullivan operation not only exists here in the States, but also overseas in Africa and elsewhere. So he had a very impressive and productive operation. We, just as an anecdote, the head of FAA, Jack Schaefer, at the time, was called up on Capitol Hill about what we were doing in our recruitment to bring all of these black folks on board with FAA. And obviously it was a Southern senator that called us to attend that hearing that was conducted. And the senator or congressman asked the question of where do you get these people from? Are they off the street? And he said, maybe some. And he says, well, what do you do with them when they're hired and don't meet the grade? He said, well, I'll tell you, the main thing is that it's like going fishing. He said, if you catch a fish and it doesn't make the limit, you toss it back. And here we are in this sophisticated hearing, and the head of the FAA gave that retort.
You had another anecdote about Rick Jones and Don Taylor.
Yes. Rick Jones and Don Taylor were probably, during that time, rare entities because they had been black air traffic controllers, the two of them, in the Army Air Corps. I was recruited during the time when you had the CAA, Civilian Air Organization, and you had the Army Air Association, and from that, the Army people were controlling their own aircraft, and the civilian air traffic were controlling the civilian aircraft. And somewhere the twain had to meet because you didn't want them to run into each other, and the coordination that took place between the two to be sure the planes didn't crash into each other was set up tenuously, but nonetheless, Rick and his buddy were both those rare entities that had experience in controlling air traffic when the changeover took place towards FAA. And so they, in conjunction with the other black executives in FAA and the HR and personnel people and the Civil Rights Office for FAA were in conjunction to bring some changes about. For example, we had a few of the Kentucky, the airmen from Tuskegee who were in that, veterans of the Tuskegee Airmen organization, which had its own history of escorting fighter bombers during World War II and being very successful in what they did when the black folks were allowed to escort the bombers and to be in a segregated existence. And ultimately, they were requested by the white pilots of the bombers to escort them because of their competitive success over other escorts, uh, and were embraced in integrating the social network in the service clubs that they were excluded from previously. So, with all of us combined, the one fellow who was in the executive ranks of the air traffic control organization, whose responsibility was to establish the rules that provided for noise abatement and the routes that air traffic control could provide after late at night over areas that were residential and so forth. Kind of took the lead with all of us and had flown track government aircraft for during the business in the FAA. Okay. Anything further?
Well, I was going to say, I believe that's your last work with the FAA, because at that point you moved up to the DOT, right, in 72?
Yeah.
And you worked on personnel policy?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that position and how you got it?
Well, I guess that enterprise of recruitment for the that recruitment to integrate the control towers with a representative number of black employees had, of course, reached its peak, and that at a certain point, then a competitive situation came as we were winding down to compete for other positions. And so I competed for a position over at Department of Transportation, and was selected to head a policy position in the personnel or HR operation for the department, which was over FAA.
And when you say personnel policy, is that sort of guidelines for how employees should behave themselves on the job and what they were and were not allowed to do?
It had to do with pretty much a written guide for other HR people, for HR people, department-wide. Obviously, there is legislation that's enacted from time to time by Congress that requires that government operate in a certain way. And so it's up to us to implement those and to generate policy that will truly apply what was intended by Congress.
Okay. So it was less how they should behave and more what they needed to do to meet the requirements of the government for the work that they did.
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else in that job that you want to talk about? Because that was the first time you had, you were still, the FAA is part of the Department of Transportation.
Yeah.
But you were on a different level. Were you already known around the agencies then? Did they know who you were when you applied for the job?
Surely they did know who I was, because I guess I had the personnel there that worked on the Secretary's Awards program. And obviously the management of the department was made aware of the various nominees that it required to be considered for award. So yes, I was a known entity.
Okay. What kind of team did you work with on personnel policy? Was it a representative from all of the departments under the Department of Transportation, or was it a small group just at the DOT? What did the work, like the people who worked on it? Who were they?
Well, they were usually it's not a large team. It was about 4 or 5 people. And they would usually coordinate with people of expertise to coordinate and sign off on whatever it was that we would be working on. For example, lawyers may have to have input on certain items we were implementing, and so our people would go to the lawyers and get them to work with us in terms of how we express things that are to be implemented. So our people generally coordinated to get the input of the expertise where needed.
Okay. Did you enjoy that work?
each time when you call it enjoyed, I guess I was challenged every step of the way. And so, it's a matter of just moving forward and doing what I had to do in those situations.
so
and I relied on my network to be able to do what I had to do.
1975 has you leaving the Department of Transportation for the Department of Agriculture for their Civil Rights Office, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I moved. My mentor had moved to agriculture, handling a management position, and they were, when I was in the department, I was in a situation where my authority was being questioned by the political people in terms of being one with the authority to process the schedule that has to do with persons who had worked well with the campaign, knocking on doors and whatnot, and who may not have the qualification to qualify for the level of government job that they're being placed in. And it was the preachments at that time by the secretary was that, and his public affairs people had issued the news that they were going to consider minorities for all positions. And my duty was to sign off on the document to hire in a top management position a person who did not qualify, but to assure that a minority person, as a part of my duties, was considered. And when he came to me and I asked a question, then he said, "What is this SH business about?" And I told him about that, and it was the day I was going on vacation, and so I went on vacation, and when I returned, there were two people. There was one person in my office, and so we had two persons sitting in the office together, and at that time, my mentor, who had moved over to agriculture, called me to get a recommendation as to who I could recommend for a job as civil rights director in the Department of Agriculture for the food stamp program. And I told him, yeah, I do have a recommendation. And he said, who? I said, me. And so I moved from my job at that point in the department over to agriculture, and that was my transition agency-wise. But I would say that agriculture was not one of the young departments such as Department of Transportation was. It had been rooted for years during the time of segregation, where the black farmers lost their farms as a result of the monies that were appropriated being given to loaned to white farmers, but not to black farmers. And so it had a history that way. And so that was kind of the situation I had to deal with as best I could.
Did you enjoy working with your mentor again when you got there?
Yeah, I did. And he later moved out of town to I'm trying to remember the state, but in any rate, yeah, I joined him over there.
And what was the day-to-day work like?
What was their work like?
Yeah, like day-to-day, what were you doing? Were you, was everything from the office? Were there on-site visits? What were the investigations like?
Okay, what happened over there was that there was a procedure in civil rights that was an employee could complain on a discrimination basis that he or she had a problem of being treated different from the white employees. And we would investigate to find out what the situation was in interviewing the managers who were over them and the complainant, rendering a report to the top management to make a determination as to what could be done to correct the situation. And some were legitimate, and some, fairly enough, were considered legitimate. For example, we had a situation where the food stamp program was under agriculture, and we were responsible for the destruction of food stamps, and the policing of of the food stamps that were stolen or redeemed, and we had the responsibility to have representatives who would recruit people who are part of the community to test those facilities that were redeeming more food stamps than they properly should be redeemed. There was a food stamp black market, and so we used to have to send personnel who had recruited the local people who blended more into the local situation to go in with only food stamps to make unauthorized purchases that were part of the policy for the operation of the program dictated for redemption of food stamps. And we had certain situations where we had a mom and pop store that was redeeming more food stamps than the giant supermarket. And so they stood out like a sore thumb. And San Juan, Puerto Rico, for example, had a food stamp destruction facility where they operated that office behind cages, security cages, with personnel in there processing the food stamps for redemption. And we found out by putting an undercover person in there that they were taking food stamps out in their lunch boxes at lunchtime. We even had one of our undercovers assassinated there. Department of Justice was also working with us in terms of leading the violators to escalate their activity and being turned over to the FBI. Those were kind of exciting things that we were engaged in. Now, what happened was that when we had to work with, the agency had to work with food stamp policy, that the advocate organizations, when we wrote policy on food stamps to reduce the amount of money we were spending on the program to accommodate Congress, was being challenged legally by the advocate organizations. And at one point then, the Department of Justice, on one point, my employees were individually sued by the advocate organizations for writing policy that reduced the availability of food stamps to the public. And so we got to the point where the Department of Justice provided a lawyer to us and to my workers to represent them. And we thought that in our briefings that we had gotten everything agreed to on how he was going to handle our case. But when he handled our case, it was contrary to what we thought we had agreed to. So we asked him the question, why did you deviate from what we understood? And he said, I don't represent you, I represent the government. At which point we hired private lawyers to represent my employees, and ultimately we charged it to the Department of Justice, and ultimately they were paid out of the federal funds.
Were they organized? Were they unionized?
No.
No? Okay. Were you still at the Department of Agriculture in '79 when you were division chief for policy? Is that where you still were?
Yeah, I gather. In my resume, as indicated.
I think your resume.
Okay, what had happened was it expanded my responsibility from policy to those other enterprises that I mentioned, and expanded it a couple times. I landed on my feet, and so they had a reorganization again, and they brought a Southern executive up to head the division of the food stamp program, and he had come up and was doing things like we would meet late in the after work hours to work on policy that to conform with what Congress had legislated, and usually there was a document that resulted from what we had worked out policy-wise, and it was so crucial that it had to reach the head of the agriculture department the same night, and I was asked if I would, on my way home, if I could take the document to the Secretary of Agriculture house, and I had some educational commitments that night, and I kind of I said to him that it's not going to be convenient because I have a commitment, in which the next day I received a note which looked like an informal note that expressed his disappointment in me for not agreeing to be his message boy. so they had loaded me up with a lot of extra burden, and I got to the point where they were going to have another reorganization to try to get at me. And that was the time I decided to retire. And I went to lunch with him during my final days, and he asked me if I'd do a favor for him. And he said, "What?" I said, "What's that?" And he says, "I would like you to write me a letter saying that the retirement was of my free will and it was not due for anything else, and because he had a discrimination complaint that was still pending against him down south, waiting for a hearing."
That just makes him look guilty of what he's accused of.
Well, discrimination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned retirement. Do you have anything else to talk about your time at the Department of Agriculture?
No, not really.
Okay. So you retired in the early 80s.
Okay.
But I can't imagine that retirement for you was sitting at home.
No, it was not, because I then joined government contractors to work with them on various contracts that they had were executing. For example, the Library of Congress, after years in the black community, was considered to be a plantation where the black employees were relegated to the lowest level of employment and pay in the organization. One of the black congressmen hired the contractor to study the situation at the Library of Congress and prepare a report on the situation there. And they had their own civil rights director at the time just to comply with the federal employment requirements. And so I received the report and delivered the report to the Librarian of Congress and his top management crew and I delivered it on behalf of the contractor. I was given a brief period to read it and to deliver my own words at the hearing. So after that, the Librarian of Congress turned to the contractor and says, "Okay, fine, that's fine, your report. Now tell me how I can fix it." And so he was contracted to make recommendations for implementation. And obviously the black congressman got a copy of that too. And I was still employed to deliver that report and the observations that we were addressing. And I also worked as a contractor for various agencies like Interior, because my wife at the time developed various training materials for engineers that were going to work in the Department of Interior. And a part of that was I generally delivered some of that aspect of it. We also she also developed a course that had to do with veterans benefits. All of these were developed as a matter of coordinating and interviewing the management and lawyers in the various disciplines of the department that was being addressed. I taught courses at the Civil Service Commission, which was the HR for government, and somewhat. And so I did all of those kinds of things, where we worked as a team in terms of post-retirement situations.
And after retirement. Well,
there was one other thing that
okay.
came to mind was that the Director of Civil Rights for the Washington National Airport in Virginia was on extended medical leave, and she was out for about 3 months or so, and this particular resume was written in terms of my qualifications to come in and head up that office and continue the work that they should do, were doing, and when she left, and to provide continuation. And what was taking place at that time was the expansion of the Washington National Airport in Virginia. Now, the jurisdiction of that office was the airport in Virginia, in Dulles, and Virginia, and Dulles and Virginia. Anyhow, I worked with that, and we investigated applicants who were potential vendors in the expansion area of the airport. I believe I earlier mentioned Mrs. Fields, for example. We found that Mrs. Fields was the wife of Mr. Fields, who in effect owned Mrs. Fields. And of course, our investigation was advisory to top management, on which they could base decisions as to who would be a vendor in the expanded airport. After she returned, of course, I had the option of continuing to work in her as a staff, part of her staff, which I declined for other opportunities.
So I have a few notes about things you did, maybe after the contract work, which was, I think one thing was that you were, was it president of the Oyster Harbor Community Organization?
That's where I reside now.
Mm-hmm.
I was president here, and I had kind of a short term, but I was elected, and of course it was not incorporated as such, but the jurisdiction had to do with the fact that they might have previously been incorporated, but had surrendered it to the county to receive some of the benefits such as collection of taxes and services like trash pickup and uh, improvement of the roads and all of that, which got to be too much for them. I had moved from the town of Highland Beach, which was incorporated and was the only city within Anne Arundel County besides Annapolis, the city of Annapolis, Maryland. I used to be mayor over there.
Okay. And I also have notes about that. Was it, I have a note about Highland Beach and black professionals. Was it?
Yes, it was a community mostly of black professionals. That was how it was able to obtain, back in the day, the black professionals and politicians were able to obtain the incorporation that it still enjoys. They do have elections over there, and they do still enjoy a professional residency. Obviously, as time went on, the children of the former property owners were not able to hold on to the properties and resold some of them primarily within the confines of word of mouth among the black community. So they were able to still be pretty much become an integrated community where you had both blacks and white property owners.
When I got here yesterday to start the interview, you talked for a minute about people coming together to do good work. The achievement with other people. But we didn't get that on the recording. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Well, I think my preamble was that as I spoke about the fact that I started in the enterprise of implementing the Civil Rights Act of 64, how the route to that existed meaningful activity went through a kind of zigzagging kind of route to wind up with all the parties that were involved coming together to make a success of what ultimately became a noteworthy uh, uh, activity that resulted in improving the history of the nation in terms of applying to all people and making all people whole in terms of representation.
Um, are there any further experiences that you would like to share or expand on or cover that we haven't covered or that you want to talk about more?
No, I guess that I have to tell you about the truth of my situation, current situation, as moving over across the water from the Highland Beach area to Oyster Harbor. I was desirous to be on the water. Highland Beach was not on the water. There was a property between Highland Beach and the water referred to as Venice Beach, which was another jurisdiction that was under the county. When I bought property over here with the intention of building and possibly getting into my hobby of boating, and of course it was interesting that I was kind of reprimanded over at Highland Beach in terms of buying property over here and how fully their representation might be on their behalf as various interaction of the community towards Annapolis might be. So ultimately I built and I moved over here, and because of my experience I was elected for a very short term to be the president of the civic association that ran Oyster Harbor, where I have currently moved. And so when I met certain resistance from the people who had nominated me and placed me in office, in terms of positive kinds of changes I wanted to make. After a year or so in the position, I indicated I was resigning, and they were saying nobody has done that previously. And I said to them, watch me.
Anything else you can think of?
No, not really.
Well, I'm always happy to come back if you want to add more, okay?
Oh, yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and also to your lovely wife, Cynthia, for helping coordinate all of this. I really appreciate that you have taken the time to do this interview on behalf of the Southern Labor Archives, and I am excited for it to be part of the collection and for people to learn from your story. Thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time and your organization to feeling to regarding that I had something to offer in terms of the air traffic control situation and how we began with the enterprise of integration of the control tower, which is the subject of the information gathering that you're doing.
Well, and the collection is actually called African Americans in Transportation. So we actually also have someone who, another man who did policy at the FAA, but later than when you were there. And we have, there's a woman who actually worked for Amtrak for many years.
Oh,
and she
wow.
and she started as an office assistant or secretary and worked her way up to counselor for apparently and sadly there are a lot of train suicides, people who jump in front of trains.
Oh, yeah.
So she's one of the people who go out and work with the community and with the driver of the train and anyone else that witnessed it to help them with it when it happened. So you not only talked about air traffic control, but also your time at the FAA and like creating policy and working and doing HR. I mean, some people think that maybe that isn't the same thing, but none of that works if you don't have policy in place and people reinforcing that stuff. So it's all connected. It's all yeah, totally. Well, I'll thank you again, and I will end our recording, and we will get this to the archives.
All right, thank you.